In this video, I'm going to discuss the basic materials we use for painting in watercolor. First, we'll start with the palette. I use an enamel butcher's tray. I like this surface because the paint will sit on the surface and it will spread out and it won't bead up like it does on some of the plastic palettes that you buy out there. Some people prefer wells in their palette. I prefer using the flat butcher's tray. I keep my colors around the outside, and then I keep the large area in the middle for my mixing area. And in a future video I will discuss how to actually set up the palette. We also use paper towels. Some people prefer Viva paper towels because they're smoother and they leave less of an impression when we're doing special techniques. But you'll need them for cleaning up, for taking moisture out of your brush, and a host of other reasons we will be using paper towels. This is a large flat brush. This is good for laying down water or very large washes, but typically I'll use a brush like this to lay water down on the paper in a quick manner. Oval flats. These are flat brushes. They come in, all of these brushes come in a variety of sizes, and these are flats because they're flat across the top. These are oval flats, and I have those in a variety of sizes. My workhorses are these round brushes. They actually come to a point, but they're called rounds. And so once you put water on them, they do come back to a nice point. And I use these all the time. The last brush that I use is a rigger. Some people call them liners. These are script liners, also known as a script liner. And all of these brushes are made by Robert Simmons. They're the Robert Simmons White Sable series. They're synthetic, so they're more on the inexpensive side than an actual animal hair brush. And they also hold their shape very well, and they work just as well as the sable brushes. You'll also need a pencil for drawing and a couple of erasers. I use two different types of erasers. The kneaded erasers or gum erasers are nice because they don't leave any residue behind like a normal white eraser would. I don't use a colored eraser on the watercolor paper because it can leave a red streak behind. So I would use this more for doing drawings elsewhere and then transferring them onto the watercolor paper. So I would advise having two different types of erasers, and again I'll explain the use of those later on. You'll also need a water bucket, and I like a transparent water bucket because I like to be able to see how far I'm dipping the brush into the water, and if it's transparent you can actually see that, and you can actually load the brush with just as much or as little water as you need. We will also use masking tape. I use regular masking tape because it's basically colorless. You can use white or just this beige tape. You don't need anything fancy. I get this from the hardware store. It's very inexpensive. If you are using the colored tape like painter's masking tape that comes in this bright obnoxious blue or green, that can be very distracting when you're painting a watercolor. So I really stick with either white or beige paint. This is masking fluid. I use the Peebo variety because it's gray and you can actually see it working. You can see it go down on the paper as you're painting. And this is a rubber cement pickup which actually picks up the masking fluid after it's dry, after you're finished working with it in your painting. These, I will also give a in-depth explanation on how to use masking fluid and what it's used for later on. But this is something that I use all the time. These are two different types of spray bottles. This is a misting spray bottle. So you can see it just sends a nice fine mist out. I'll use that to keep my paints damp and movable on my palette. And then this is more like a regular Windex bottle where it sprays droplets. And that I use for a variety of techniques, which will be explained later. Hairdryer. So in between doing different washes, you can dry down your painting using the hairdryer to speed things along. Also a ruler. I have a variety of paints here from different manufacturers. I've been working in watercolor for so long that I've come to know and appreciate particular pigments from particular manufacturers. So they are my go-to colors, my go-to manufacturers and pigments, so I always know what to expect from them. You can have a particular color from one manufacturer, and if you buy the same color name from a different manufacturer, you can have a completely different color. So it's good to get to know your paints and stick with a particular manufacturer, just like I do my brushes. The nice thing about these brushes is I know what to expect from them. If I have a round that's a number 4 from one manufacturer, and then I go to another manufacturer and I have a number 12, they are going to behave very differently. So that's why I use this whole range from the Robert Simmons series, because I know what to expect from them. Paper. I work on Arches paper. It's a very wonderful sheet that is very high quality, and I work on cold press. There are 3 different types of watercolor paper. There's hot press, which is smooth. There's cold press, which has a little bit of a tooth to it, and there is a rough version of it too, which is rougher. So the cold press, as you can see here, has a little bit of a tooth. This paper is wonderful because it takes a beating. You can do a lot of different techniques and scraping and splattering and using different, you can use salt on it and alcohol and all kinds of different things, and it holds all that. It's very important that you work on good paper. If you are practicing on inexpensive paper, you won't have the same results. If you're practicing on one surface and then you're painting on another surface, it's like learning how to play baseball with a basketball. They're just 2 different, completely different things. And so you always want to practice on the good paper. It's always a good idea to sacrifice a piece of this paper so that you can learn to work on the same surface. This particular paper that I'm using is on a watercolor block, and when you buy it, it's all wrapped up in plastic like this, and I'm going to describe how you open this up and use it. So you want to peel off the plastic. And when you open it up, you'll notice it has a black piece of paper on it. It's just a protective sheet. You'll also notice that there's a little white opening here, and the other 4 sides, the rest of it, is covered with this black gum. It's like a peel-off pad of paper. And so what you want to do is take a palette knife or a dull table knife, and you want to slip this into the pad underneath that black sheet of paper, pulling out, keeping the knife flat because you don't want to damage the surface of the paper. You'll peel that protective sheet off. Now you're ready to use the paper. Why do I keep it on this block? The purpose of the block is to keep the paper flat. Anyone who's seen paper get wet, you know that it buckles, and you don't want buckling paper when you're trying to paint on it, because water will flow into the valleys and off the hills. So what this does is it keeps the paper flat. It will buckle some, but not as much as just a regular sheet of paper that's not gummed or taped down on the edges. There are other ways of preparing paper. I also use Arches in sheet form, 140 pound and 300 pound. There are different weights of paper. This is actually 140 pound paper. It's a nice heavy paper. And then I also work on 300 pound when I'm working on a large sheet and I don't want to stretch the paper. So this is basically already stretched. Stretching is a whole other thing that I can describe in another video. So that's an overview of the materials that I use for most of my watercolor painting.